Hey everyone, welcome in. Ready to dive into a topic that's kind of got that geopolitical thriller vibe?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking power shifts, economic uncertainty, and you guessed it, the future of oil.
Big stuff. And what's really interesting is how these things we think of as separate, they're all kind of like woven together.
Totally. It's like we're seeing a massive, I don't know, like a global landscape shift happening right in front of us.
Exactly, yeah.
So the excerpts we're looking at today, they come from a book that's, well, it's pretty direct. It argues that all those crises we see, COVID, climate change, political instability, they're not just random things, you know?
Yeah.
They're like symptoms of a much bigger transformation that's going on.
Right.
And the author says at the heart of it all is oil. Or more specifically, something they call the decline of the petrodollar system, which I gotta admit, this sounds a little intimidating maybe.
Yeah, it's definitely a mouthful.
Yeah.
But it's actually, think of it this way. For decades, if you wanted to buy oil, you pretty much had to use U.S. dollars.
Okay.
That system gave the U.S. a lot of economic power, on a global scale.
Right.
But like any system, it starts to show some cracks, right? And that's what the author's really highlighting here.
So it's bigger than just like whether gas prices are up or down this week.
Yeah.
It's about how this system, this petrodollar system, affects who has power in the world.
Exactly, yeah. Imagine like you want to buy something from Japan, like a car.
Yeah.
Right now, you'd probably need to convert your money to U.S. dollars to do that.
Right.
But what if you could just like skip that whole dollar part? Use a different currency altogether. The author's saying that as this petrodollar thing weakens, it opens the door for other big players, especially in Asia, to step in and kind of like reshape the world order.
Wow. That's huge. It's like the foundation of global trade is shifting under our feet, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm following you, this book is saying that this shift in like economic power, that's also going to lead to a shift in political power.
Exactly.
And they're saying Asia, especially China, is in a position to take the lead.
Yeah, that's one of the core arguments here, yeah.
Right.
And it's not like just about China being ambitious or anything.
Right.
The author suggests that the West's decline is partly because of stuff we're doing to ourselves, like internal struggles and not being able to adapt to a world that's changing so fast.
Right. Like we're so busy with our own problems, we don't see what's happening on a bigger scale.
Exactly.
And speaking of big changes, the author uses this really interesting comparison. They compare the West to like a shaky, fragile financial system. And then Asia is more about building a strong manufacturing base. It's like two totally different approaches.
And they argue that while we, like the West, have become really dependent on these complex financial systems, Asia's focused on something they see as more sustainable.
Interesting.
Producing actual stuff, controlling supply chains, like they're building the foundation of what the future global economy might look like.
So it's like, if we think about it like building a house, the West built this really fancy house, but maybe on a foundation that wasn't so strong.
Yeah.
And Asia's been quietly, reinforcing the ground floor this whole time.
Right.
Right.
But what does that actually look like day to day? If this power shift to the East keeps happening, what changes are we going to see in our lives?
That's the million-dollar question, and is what we're going to dig into in the next part of our deep dive.
So we're talking about this potential power shift, right? Like the balance is tipping eastward, and China's kind of becoming this dominant force. But this book, it goes even further. It actually says that this whole century, the 21st century, it's going to be the Asian Millennium.
Wow.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it is. But the author, they're not just throwing it out there. They look at like historical cycles and what's happening in the world right now.
And they say that while the West, especially the U.S., is dealing with all these internal problems, economic stuff that might not be sustainable in the long run, China is being strategic. They're putting themselves in a position to like fill that gap.
So it's like, while we're busy trying to fix our own problems, they're out there building the future.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
And it makes sense that if other countries see that, they're going to start looking to China for leadership.
Right. The author talks about this like new community that's forming. And it's not necessarily about agreeing on every single thing. It's more about economic opportunity.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, they see countries all over Europe, Africa, even Oceania, kind of aligning themselves with, where they think there's the most potential. And more, that seems to be in the East.
It's like everyone's realizing the party's moved to a new location.
Right, exactly.
But let's get specific. What does this Asian Millennium actually mean for us? Like, what would it look like in our everyday lives?
It's tough to say for sure. But the book does give us some things to think about. For one, we might see a change in how the whole global financial system works. The Chinese yuan, their currency, could actually challenge the US dollar.
Wow. So instead of using dollars for everything, we might be using a totally different currency.
Exactly. And that would affect everything. The prices we pay for stuff, how much our savings are worth, you name it.
Yeah, that's huge. It'd be like, I don't know, if the whole world suddenly switched from miles to kilometers. A massive adjustment.
For sure.
And it's not just the economy, is it? This would change global culture, too.
Absolutely. We'd probably see Asian languages, their values, their ideas becoming a lot more prominent globally. Like, think about K-pop, right? Or how popular Asian cinema has become.
Right.
Those are just little examples, but they show how cultural influence changes along with economic power. We could be looking at a future where, I don't know, learning Mandarin or understanding Eastern philosophies is as normal as like learning English or studying Western thought is now.
It's really hard to wrap your head around this whole reshaping of the world. But the author, I mean, they're not exactly sugarcoating it. They're actually saying things are going to get tougher before they get better, like climate change, not enough resources, the economy being unstable, social unrest, all of it coming to a head.
Yeah, they don't shy away from the challenges.
Yeah.
The author's argument is that the normal we used to know, it's gone. We're in this period now of like constant change, a lot of uncertainty, a new normal, and it's going to challenge a lot of what we thought we knew about the world.
So maybe not all sunshine and roses in this Asian millennium, but what I think people really want to know is, what can we do about it? If this is already happening, how do we deal with it? How do we not just survive, but actually thrive in this world that's changing so fast?
That's the question, right? And I don't think the author has any easy answers.
Yeah.
But they do say that just understanding these forces that are at play, that's the first step to getting some control back.
Okay, so we're talking about some really big changes, kind of scary changes, honestly. And it's easy to feel like overwhelmed. Like, what's even the point of knowing all this if we're like heading for a global crisis anyway?
I think a lot of people are feeling that way for sure. But here's the thing, even if these big shifts are already happening, if we understand, you know, what's causing them, what's going on behind the scenes, it helps us make better decisions.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like they say, knowledge is power.
Right. It's about being prepared, not freaking out.
I like that. But still, I mean, what can one person actually do? It feels kind of, I don't know, insignificant when you're talking about global stuff, right?
Yeah, well, the author, they actually say we need to look at it differently. Like, for example, they talk about how debt is basically the new form of colonization.
Well, hold on. Debt? As in, like, owing money?
Yeah.
That's colonization.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
They argue that in a world that's like increasingly run by these really powerful countries and corporations, our reliance on debt, and that could be personal debt, national debt, even debt that like companies have, it takes away our freedom to act. We're stuck answering to whoever's, you know, holding the money.
So it's like we're free in one way, but not really free in another.
Exactly.
Instead of being controlled by like empires and colonies, it's like the whole economy is controlled by who owes what to whom.
Right. And the author says this new kind of colonization, it might be even trickier because we don't always see it. You know? It's not as obvious.
Yeah, that is a really, I don't know, unsettling way to think about it. But okay, let's say we agree. What can we actually do to like break free?
Well, they have a few suggestions. Personally, it starts with being more aware of like our money. Where are we spending it? What are we supporting with our purchases?
Okay.
If we're more mindful about that, we can choose to support businesses that, you know, align with what we believe in.
So it's like voting with our dollars.
Yeah.
I like that idea. But it does feel like sometimes you don't have much of a choice, you know? Like you got to buy what you can afford, even if it's not perfect.
Totally. And the author gets that. They say that to really change things, it's going to take big systemic shifts, not just like individual actions,
right,
but even small choices. When enough people make them, they can create a ripple effect. It can push for those bigger changes to happen.
So be mindful of our own choices, but also work together to make bigger changes. What else? Like on a personal level, the author said something about education, right? And thinking critically.
That's a big one. We can't just like passively absorb information anymore. We have to think for ourselves, question what we hear, and look for different perspectives, especially with like So much information out there, some of it not even true.
It's so easy to get stuck in a bubble, like online especially. We need to be more careful about where we're getting our information from.
Exactly. And beyond that, the author really encourages people to be more active citizens, like go to those town hall meetings, talk to your elected officials, support organizations that are, fighting for a better future. They're reminding us that we're not just like cogs in a machine. We have power, we have a voice, and we have to use it.
Wow, this has been like a whirlwind. We've gone from oil to Asia to debt as colonization.
It's a lot to take in. Yeah.
My brain is like full.
It's definitely a lot to think about, but I think the main thing to remember, even though we're talking about some intense changes, it's not about freaking out. It's about being informed, getting involved, and remembering that even with all this stuff going on, we have more control than we think.
I love that. And to our listeners, if you found today's deep dive as interesting as I did, you should check out the full book, Pace to Text. It's definitely one of those books that makes you think, and it gives you a whole new perspective on how the world works.
Totally agree. It might make you uncomfortable at times, but it'll also make you think and hopefully feel like you can actually handle these crazy times we're living in.
And on that note, one final thought before we go. If debt is the new form of colonization, what does real freedom actually look like in this day and age? Something to think about. Until next time, happy diving.